Welcome to the STEM Talk Podcast, your 30-minute monthly STEM pulse check. Hosted by the After School STEM Hub, STEM Education Coalition, and STEM Ecosystems by TIES. The STEM Talk Podcast creates a safe space for dialogue while maintaining a focus on information that matters to you and the communities you serve. In just 30 minutes each month, join our experts from across the STEM landscape as they provide factual information, practical strategies, and actionable resources to help you navigate the ever-changing world of STEM education, workforce development, policy, and advocacy. Today's episode is called Don't Get Caught Napping, because if you blink, you might miss a critical policy shift affecting your STEM education program. Hi, my name is Jenny Frank, and I'm the director of the STEM Ecosystem Initiative here at TIES. If you've been watching the federal landscape lately, you know it's anything but predictable. From NSF grant disruptions to new Department of Education competitive priorities and a flurry of RFIs to launch the Presidential AI Challenge, it feels like the ground is literally shifting beneath our feet. This is not the time, though, to hit the snooze button on federal policy. Today, we're cutting through the confusion to help you understand what these changes mean for your programs and where new opportunities are emerging. Whether you're navigating grant applications, planning for the year ahead, or simply just trying to keep pace with all of these new federal policies, this conversation will wake you up to what matters most and help you chart your course forward. Let's welcome back our expert guests. Della Cronin is principal at Bose Public Affairs Group. James is executive director of the STEM Education Coalition. Leslie Brooks is STEM manager at the After School Alliance, and Anita Krishnamurthy is senior vice president for STEM and youth civic engagement at the After School Alliance. All right, crew, let's get started.
Well, hi, everybody. So the theme today, Don't Get Caught Napping, is a little bit of a play on words, if you will, with the federal government shutdown, because obviously it's disheartening to see this deadlock in Washington, D.C. and the fact that the federal government is shut down. But there are opportunities in this environment nonetheless. And the don't get caught napping part is don't wait to look at some of the new federal grant opportunities we're talking about. Don't let deadlines pass. Don't other things happen that will put you at the back of the line when the federal government reopens. So let's go through it. So we're in day 8 of the shutdown. There have been 6 votes in the United States Senate where you need 60 votes to pass a piece of funding legislation. Those votes have broken down 55-45. So they're 5 votes short of the 60 votes needed to agree on something to continue federal funding. So therefore, the federal government is technically in what's called a partial shutdown, meaning all the non-essential systems of the federal government are shutting down or are shut down. That means there's roughly 750,000 employees that are furloughed across the federal agencies. Each agency is a little bit different. The Department of Education is operating at 13% of its prior employment. What that means we'll get to in a minute, but new grants and oversight and things that are not related to formula funding are for the most part on hold at the Department of Education. And there's no certainty that this will end anytime soon. We're still at the early stages of this in terms of the pain of payments not being processed and things that happen in the federal government not happening. The congressional staff are close to missing their first official paychecks, which is usually a sign of things starting to turn up on the negotiators. But we'll spend a little bit more time talking about what some of the implications of the shutdown are, and then cover some advice to people in the field about what you should be doing in the meantime. So just a little more on the impacts. So to be clear, title funding, meaning Title I, IDEA, Title IV, Part A, those funds are still flowing. However, new grants, meaning competitive grants out of the Department of Education, are if not entirely stopped, very nearly entirely stopped. Meaning there might be a couple of things that were open on the day of the shutdown or closed on the day of the shutdown that may still be in process. But for the most part, all the new grants are frozen. And the same thing applies to higher education and research agencies. So all of the discretionary grants at NSF, the Department of Energy, NIH are all paused. Many of the graduate assistantships are furloughed, meaning if you were on a federal graduate student assistantship, those funds will stop flowing. You may have some backlog in universities where some of those are a little bit forward funding, but those are going to come to a close. All of the uh, all of the civil rights investigations, teacher training programs, things that depended upon direct federal funding are all on pause. And the other part of this is the upcoming fiscal year budgets are also uncertain as a product of this because we're now in fiscal year 2026, but we don't have a budget for fiscal year 2026 or a continuing resolution for that period of time. And that goes back to some of the things you may have read in the headlines about the administration, the White House, the Office of Management and Budget, talking about turning some of these furloughs into reductions in force and things of that kind. So it's not that we're under a continuing resolution like we have been in the past where everything stays the same. The absence of that gives the executive branch a lot of discretion in terms of what they do with these displaced employees. And then lastly, just a few things to touch on. Lots of disruptions, even if your federal funding is still flowing, there are lots of disruptions in the educational pipeline nonetheless. So 21st century community learning centers are disrupted sort of up and down the spectrum in different ways, even if they've got current funding from the formula part of 21st century. A lot of those state competitions may not be happening and so forth. So that's an example. That population is a little over 1.6 million students. Reimbursement of expenses, for example, are on hold. So there's a lot of cash flow implications, even if you have formula funds that have already been reduced. Some of the add-on activities like robotics and mentoring that depend on other federal flows of funds are also being reduced. And obviously, this is going to happen differently in schools that are more federally impacted. So rural and low-income schools that receive more money from the federal government in different ways are going to be more impacted than some other federal schools. And obviously, whatever our take is on the shutdown, people who are depending on federal funding, federal services are obviously going to feel the impact first. So what does all this mean? So a couple of things to look forward. So one thing I'll say is, if you look at the slate of federal grant opportunities, the ones that are paused are probably going to operate on a first come, first serve type of basis. So anticipating the reopening of the federal government means not missing any current grant deadlines you see out there. So maybe your application's not reviewed, but you still need to make sure it's submitted if you see an upcoming deadline for any of these type of activities. In terms of, while you may not be able to do certain things, state and local governments are still wide open. And I think this is a really great time to be building new relationships and looking for opportunities once the federal government reopens. And I think you'll catch a lot of people napping who missed those early application deadlines. We'll get to some of that in the next section. And then lastly, you also want to make sure you're gathering impact data on the implications of the shutdown. How is it affecting your district, your community, your program? All of those are really good data points to gather so that we have good, strong arguments down the road. So now let me turn it over to Della.
So to build on to what James was saying, you want to position yourself for these reprogram funds when they're available. Don't keep your eye on the ball, as they would say. Don't get caught napping. All the cliches that we're throwing into this presentation on, not thinking that a shutdown is a time to slow down your own work. And then, translate readiness into advocacy. This is a time to think about how you can convey what's going on in your community on STEM education in one-pagers. Think about how the impact is affecting you and what's going on in your schools. I know that for those of you who are in Pennsylvania, you have some interactions with this federal shutdown and your state's ability or inability to pass a budget. That means even though most schools across the country are seeing these federal funds flow, you are not in Pennsylvania because there's stipulations on how federal funds can flow there that are adversely affecting your schools. We know that after-school programs in that state in particular are shutting down because of those interactions. Important to let lawmakers know about that and what it's doing to families and communities on the ground. It's also a time to think about site visits. We think that seeing things firsthand is one of the most effective ways to advocate for the things that are important in STEM education. And, you know, once again, branding your organization as one that's a partner to those who are in positions of influence. You're ready to go, you're doing important work, and that doesn't change when the government sees a disruption like this. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about some of the things that are actual opportunities for the community to influence, maybe not what's happening right now, but what will happen. For those of you who might remember the first Trump administration, they put out a series of priorities that really affected their decision-making on competitive grant funding. They prioritized investments in STEM education and computer science in particular. There are some opportunities for the community to weigh in right now on what this administration is thinking for its competitive grant programs once they're back and running. There's an opportunity to talk about supporting meaningful learning opportunities for students, which of course is in our wheelhouse, right? That is where STEM education is. Making sure that there are those disciplines are being taught in schools, encouraging standards-aligned, evidence-based instructional materials, which is something that this administration is talking about across its programs and investments. There's lots of attention being paid to math. The discussion in the aftermath of the NAEP results is certainly something that's top of mind for folks over at the Department of Education. Professional development for the educators, and competency-based models and other assessments to better measure student progress. I think that these Federal Register notices give the field an opportunity to be influential. I think the first time around they heard a lot from the STEM education community, and that certainly influenced their competitive grant making in the end. We have an opportunity as a community to do the same this time. So the first one there is the meaningful learning opportunities, and the Federal Register notice there will tell you the due date. The due date could very well on those comments fall within the shutdown. I would go ahead and submit any would-be comments during the shutdown. You don't want to assume that there's going to be an extension based on this disruption to the federal government and be wrong. And you know, I think we all have seen that this administration isn't as predictable as previous ones on many points, but this could be one. And so you want to respect those deadlines. And if you have something to say it according to the original notice. And then the second opportunity, of course, it's right in line with what this administration has been saying about its priorities for K-12 and higher education, being focused on career pathways and workforce readiness. Again, topics that are right in the STEM advocacy community's wheelhouse. Making sure that we are, as a community, linking between school and workforce opportunities, supporting the goals of the economy, talking about different ways to mark learning, measure learning, convey those skills to employers or secondary education, post-secondary education, and making sure that students are informed on what the labor market needs are and making decisions accordingly. I suspect many of you know that one of the things that this administration did in the early days was lay off a significant portion of the employees at the Institute for Education Sciences. Since then, folks at the Department of Education have been talking very much about their intention to sort of rebuild that agency. There's an opportunity to weigh in on those intentions from this request for information that the agencies have submitted to the field. I think that those of us who have read that RFI want to remind the folks who are reading the comments that the importance of measuring achievement in the terms of NAEP, It continues to be important to the field so that we can measure our outcomes and mark them across the years. And use data. I think that, we all know that data is so important in advocacy. Stories are important, but so is data, and that the field really relies on the data that IES has been providing for years and hope to continue to do so. If you haven't already submitted comments on this, there's a short turnaround. Comments are due October 15th, and I would not ignore that deadline. I would respect that deadline and submit any input that you might have on that point. The other thing that's going on is that the National Science Foundation has put out a STEM K-12 program solicitation. These are funds that they're looking to get out the door. They are open to interesting applications. These RFIs or this opportunity will focus on the administration's priority on artificial intelligence and education around there. I just wanted you to know that, this opportunity signifies the foundation's collapsing of a couple of several other discrete programs that the community has been familiar with: ASL, CS for All, DRK, and Translation and Diffusion have all been collapsed into this one opportunity. There is a rolling deadline here, but if you're interested in those funds, I would don't nap on it. Get your applications in. And then the other thing that has been announced and is probably disrupted by the shutdown, but is the White House's AI challenge. They continue to put out pretty detailed guidance on that challenge, what it is that they're hoping to do, how different stakeholders can engage in that challenge: teachers, students, employers, others. Now's, given this disruption, now might be the time to digest what the challenge is, all the opportunities there to engage, and put together a plan for doing so.
Thanks so much, James and Della. We share this slide every STEM Talk, but just wanted to share it again because this is something, if you haven't already done so, you can go to either one of these links and have an easy way to access your representative's office to let them know that you support STEM education and federal investment in STEM education. And then also, I know Della talked about the White House AI challenge. There's also the Congressional App Challenge going on right now, and I don't believe they're negatively impacted by the government shutdown. So that's another opportunity for young people to engage. And then Anita and myself wanted to share with you information about some research that we just released from the After School STEM Hub. We spent a couple of years exploring the after school STEM educator landscape. And so we just released this new report that demonstrates some of the challenges and barriers in recruitment and retention of after school STEM educators and their needs. A huge portion of that is access to professional development. And then opportunities in the field. So there's a lot of programs already implementing innovative solutions to support their after school STEM workforce. And so we have those examples laid out throughout the report. And then the most important part is implications for policy. And so we have a whole section on recommendations for federal policymakers, after school program leaders, and funders. And so we're hoping that this report can help continue the conversation on what the after school STEM educator workforce needs, because they're essentially the folks helping to build up our future STEM workforce. And then with that, we also wanted to remind you of the upcoming STEM advocacy experience. Even though folks may have some difficulty scheduling meetings with their offices during the government shutdown, we're still planning the policymaker breakfast and advocacy training on October 20th, and look forward to seeing many of you there. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we can move into questions.
Leslie, we do have a question in the Q&A from Andrea, and she's asking, are there any insights into if they will communicate when all funds are committed? So therefore, should not submit to NSF STEM K-12 until next year.
So I can speak to that one just to start things off. So how NSF ordinarily handles these things, and obviously we're in unusual times, is when they have a rolling deadline, they generally will notify people if there's some change in them accepting things on a rolling deadline basis. Meaning, I think the answer to your question is a simple yes, meaning that until you see something different, you should feel free to apply to them. NSF has a lot of, this is sort of similar to their unsolicited grant opportunities that they have across the foundation. So it's in that same spirit. So until canceled is the right way to approach that new funding opportunity. And my guess is they won't give out the money early. They'll probably hold on to it for
Betsy has a question, and she's asking about the link on the active campaign on STEM Ed Coalition.
Well, if there's not anything up there, there should be. So sorry for that. You know what? Oh, it's just because, yeah, you know what? We have one that just expired. We just need to extend it. Yeah, we have a letter that we just sent to Capitol Hill on the funding deadline. We'll make sure we put that right back up there. Thanks for the prompt.
And
it would have been good to update that before this meeting. Sorry.
And Andrea, just in response to your question, this is Anita from the After School Alliance. The way NSF handled a lot of the grants they made this year, especially for AZLE, which I'm aware of, is that they forward funded all the grants. So they made fewer grants this year so that basically anything that won an award has the funding allocated for the entire duration. And in past years, the way they approached it was that, the grantee would get year one of the funding, and then the second year's funding would be allocated with the next year's fiscal funding. But since AZLE is now gone, they've forward funded a whole bunch of those programs. So whatever is now available, which is a smaller pot in the K-12 NSF thing, because all those other funding streams, yes, were collapsed and consolidated, but they were then reduced in funding to almost half what the individual funding streams were. So we're, as James said, we are somewhat in uncharted territory, but I'm assuming that we will get some kind of indication when they sort of start hitting up against a budget limit. But that is, again, remember at some level that everybody's waiting for Congress to have its say. This is what the foundation is sort of planning based on the administration's budget request, but Congress still could come back and say, no, we want you to keep those original funding streams. And that could still happen. So in the meantime, we plan for what the knowledge that is out there, which is this collapsed funding stream.
And I'll just build on that and say, so James, you and I might be about to say the same thing, which is that applying for a grant is its own form of advocacy. If the folks who would like to see these programs go away can point to diminished interest, diminished applications, they will use that as evidence as no need for those programs. So we would like to see them oversubscribed in terms of applications, a really low success rate, so that we have the backup that we need to make the case for the need for more funds, more interest, more investment in these kinds of programs and initiatives.
Well, and exactly right, Della. And the other thing I'd add to that too is, like it or not, if you're the administration, to Anita's point, until they pass a new appropriations bill, they're still obligated to spend the funds they have. And they can do things like what they've done, which is alter the priorities somewhat, but they're still going to spend the money. And that's what we mean by don't get caught napping, right? Like that's making sure you're in line and you're expressing the priorities of the community is indeed true advocacy.
Speaking of evidence and advocacy and the value of STEM, one of the questions that came in from our registrations was, what do you feel, or where are some really great spaces or places that have good data or evidence base about the value of STEM that individuals can share with their networks to, broaden awareness?
Well, one thing I'll point people to that these things exist in lots of different industries, but one of the more compelling things I've seen in the last couple of years was if you look at the Semiconductor Industry Association did the most comprehensive workforce and skills assessment that I've seen yet for their needs in semiconductor manufacturing. They did it in response to the CHIPS Act. There are similar studies in pharmaceuticals, in critical minerals and in other areas that are sort of existing at the intersection of, inshoring and national security and critical materials needs. I think one of the more compelling arguments you can make in submitting a grant is making reference to something that's been expressed by industry to this administration and showing how your particular educational offerings are lined up to industry is sort of a direct response to some of the words and the themes that they've included in these RFIs that we're showing today. Because that's one of the really big themes is they've shifted from a focus of the prior administration, which they may have been more focused on areas of limited opportunity. In this administration, they're definitely wanting educating organizations to be showing how they're responding to industry.
And I'll just add, I think that the National Skills Coalition has good data on these issues, as does Jobs for the Future. Those two organizations have quite good data and research that can be used in all sorts of advocacy efforts for the STEM education community.
Leslie, did you see any other questions coming in?
I did not, and some were answered in the Q&A by members on the panel typing in, but I didn't see any other questions. Does anyone else have final questions?
All right. Well, I do have a good question. And, I think that maybe it's kind of like everyone answers, but what is your advice in the next couple of weeks with regard to today's topics and some good advice? Obviously you've given lots of good advice today, but what would be that one thing that you kind of want to leave people thinking about?
I'll go first. I'll say that I would really recommend that the field submit comments on the grant priorities at the Department of Education, and they don't have to be long and they don't have to be complicated. And also, I would recommend looking at what some of your colleagues are saying. The regulations.gov website allows you to see what others have commented on those priorities, which can oftentimes give you food for thought, or if you want to say the same thing to amplify the message to the folks who are in charge of doing those priorities. I think that in particular, the successful growth of access to computer science during the first Trump administration is an example of how those competitive grant priorities can really make a difference in the money that's spent and its effect.
I guess what I would add to that is do document and call your congressional reps about any impacts that the shutdown is having on the work that you're doing, because I know that we all want to serve the people we serve and make sure they don't have a lapse in services or programming, and that is great. But do let your lawmakers know about how you're doing that, where you're having to sort of hustle to get the money to be able to do that, because the last thing we want is for lawmakers to say, well, the money went away and they managed just fine, so maybe that money's not needed, right? So always let your lawmakers know, invite the media into your programs. The best form of advocacy, as I posted right at the beginning, is inviting people in to see your programs and seeing and being able to show them, not just tell them, about what these programs do for your communities, the parents, the young people in your programs, is the best form of advocacy that you can do, and hopefully an easy way of just sort of showing people what you're already doing and highlighting the great work you're doing.
I wanted to just add really quickly, one of the things that we talk a lot about is messaging. And, a really simple, thoughtful, really effective way is be very straightforward with the message, be certain that you have a call to action, and then provide the evidence. That's a nice 3-step strategy to advocacy that works, I think, in any situation when you're trying to bring awareness. James, I think you're wrapping us up.
I was going to give Leslie the last word, and I still will. But one thing I will say is if you haven't read any of the RFIs, the Federal Register notices, the other things that we produced, it may not seem like this is a time for good opportunities, but those are genuine, rich opportunities to look at, because it's not often that NSF, you may disagree with what NSF is doing, but they've put out a catch-all STEM pot of money that you can apply for at any time, which is actually a diamond in the rough in these times. So make sure you take a look at that.
Thanks, James. To finish this out, I would just say don't have your head down. You all are doing great work, and it's because of your great work that we're trying to continue this advocacy effort and push. So know that you're not alone, and if you need to have like peer groups of advocates to come together to help you get the courage to call your representative's office or invite people into your program, take advantage of that and set up your own little advocacy circles in your local area. And invite the youth in your programs or the youth that you work with into your advocacy space too, because it likely will get them excited, and they probably have amazing ideas and perspectives that we haven't even thought of.
Thank you very much to everyone. Anita, Leslie, Della, James, as always, such really thoughtful insights. And as Janelle says, always right on point. So again, thank you for joining us for episode 7 of the STEM Talk Don't Get Caught Napping. We hope that these insights today help you to navigate these maybe challenging times and certainly uncertain policy shifts, but that you are seeing that there are new opportunities for STEM programming, workforce development, and STEM innovation in your local communities. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this insightful discussion on the policy landscape affecting STEM education and workforce development. We hope you've gained valuable perspectives and actionable strategies from our conversations. We'll continue this important dialogue with critical insights about top STEM priorities and more guidance on navigating the current advocacy landscape. To learn more about the work of STEM Education Coalition, After School STEM Hub, and STEM ecosystems, please visit our websites. Until next time, keep advocating for a strong STEM education and workforce nationwide.